人は問う。己とは何か。命とは何か。宇宙とは何か。その答えを知らぬまま人は死ぬ。それこそが人の宿命。
In a Texas town I once saw, there was a modest tranquility, a small hope. But then the people were trampled upon, and one man rose against it.
You bastards!
In his hand was hope, the hope of defeating the megalomart. With enormous strength, the man fought.
そして絶望を知る。
Foolish Texans, tremble before the absolute power of C3H8. Prostrate yourselves before this overwhelming fear of charcoal and hunger for medium rare steaks. Before the name of the Propane God. Lie in the depths of death, my foolish salesman. This is your fate. For a series focused on the down-to-earth daily foibles of the average working class Joe, King of the Hill shows that it is just as comfortable handling a mortality crisis as it is with kicking people in the old sperm sweatshop.
See? See? Pop, pop, see?
While the last episode of Season 2 was focused on cultivating a feeling of oppressive doom, of life twisting into an ugly, unpleasant, and strange new norm, the second episode in this two-parter plot makes us think. It makes us think about how we could possibly still live our lives after being confronted with our own yawing grave. This is an extremely bold direction to take the show, as these are some of the hardest hitting questions a person can face, questions about life and death and what the heck is going to happen to our loved ones after we're gone, like, ugh. On its face, this sounds like a terrible concept for our comedy show to weigh into, as it's opening the door to all kinds of depressing and hopeless emotions, not really something you want to sneak in between reruns of The Simpsons and Looking for Love, Bachelorettes in Alaska. But, I am happy to report that the writer of this episode, Norm Hiscock, created a powerful story that successfully avoids some of those more sorrowful pitfalls. And hey, besides, the man also wrote Bobby Goes Nuts, so my earlier comparison of kicking down the door of the scrotum sanctum is quite apt. Some days you almost get your face blown off by your favorite gas, and other days you suffer testicular torsion via a Converse sneaker. Tough old world, ain't it? You better hang on, baby, cause this ride's about to get rough.
Y'all ever think about death?
Well, yeah, I think about it, Hank. I'm an army barber. I get up every day and stare at death in the back of the head.
But that's enough jawing from me. Let's see what kind of shenanigans those Hill Boys are up to this week in the first episode of the gigantic Season 3. We open with the series first, a recap, one that hits the main points of the first part of Best of Both Worlds.
Previously on King of the Hill. Hello?
Mother of God, it's all toilet sounds.
And once Hank throws out his corpse bag, we cut to this really stunning park where Bobby and Connie are able to get this huge panoramic view of Arlen, one which is marred by a certain smoking sight. But who gives a living fuck about that, as Bobby and Connie are in the middle of discussing the arc of their young lives.
Be a violinist. That way, I could be your opening act and we could travel the world together.
Even though the two are not an official couple or anything at this point in the show, this little exchange goes a long way in showing the audience that these are two kids who are interested in having a future together, some kind of shared something, some destiny where they'll be in each other's lives, one that kind of evokes that sort of like Sonny and Cher power couple vibe, which is something we will see more of in the years to come. But right now there is something a little bigger going on than Bobby's future career as a representative of California's 44th Congressional District.
Your dad got blown up.
Oh, frickin' Dooley, man. I swear, like, how does he get his grubby little hands on all this information? Was he Was he at the concert, happened to survive the blast and crawl from the rubble, and just had to rush over here and tell Bobby the bad news? Like, is that what happened? Or, you know what, I could actually see this being a more likely scenario. Is one of his parents like a 911 dispatcher, and they have this arrangement with Dooley where they just text their son any big juicy news that happens to come down the line? Like, hey son, I heard some like fires happening in the city limits. You better go check it out, because maybe you know who's dying in there. My goodness, that's just, oh, he is so strange and awful and weird. Or maybe, you know, starting to get into a little bit of an X-Files thing here, is he able to, like, sense tragedy and just materialize next to the person who'd be the most devastated by the news? Like, your son died, your mother forgot you, your money's all gone. Like, what the fuck is he doing? He just, he's some, like, harbinger of doom. It's just, he's really scary, but, you know, I do like him. I do like Dooley a lot, even if he does sort of have this sort of grim, like, I don't even know, this, like, cloud hanging over him. He's so weird. Oh, but I did want to say that I really appreciate the extra detailing of the additional shadowing going on around Bobby and Connie. Definitely gives this episode that sort of like, ooh, it's an animated movie going the distance by animating with a greater sense of lighting and shadowing, that kind of thing. It is really cool to see that in just like an average episode of the show, even though this is kind of a step above the average because it's like the second part of a two-parter, but still really neat to see. But forget all that additional nuance. Let's go see what's happening at Ground Zero.
My husband is in there. He had to take this job because nobody else would hire him.
We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Mangione.
What the fuck? That is such a hard dig at the old Mangione man. That is so out of pocket. My goodness, Mike Judge, that is just, ooh, you didn't have to go for the man's jugular like that. You didn't have to rip the man's whole fucking face off. That is vicious, that is cruel, that is unnecessary. Although it is all clearly being done in the spirit of good fun, and if it were me, if I were in Chuck's sensible shoes, then I gladly would have eaten up a snide comment like that if I were getting the same thick paycheck that Mr. Mangione was getting from Fox. But thankfully, it turns out that the show did not decide to kill off its main character, Wu, or Luanne, thankfully, although her continued presence in the series does come at a heavy price.
Oh, and Luanne! Oh, my lord.
Buh!
Okay, two things. First of all, love the POV we get of her burned hair falling at her feet. Those are some great shoes, by the way, and this whole thing really adds to the surreal feeling of seeing Luanne undergo such a strange transformation. Second of all, this choice to burn off all of her hair is both inconsequential, as her hair can just obviously grow back. Don't worry, it will grow back, but it is also very effective in changing how she looks at the world, as it directly conflicts with Luanne's experience at beauty school and forces her to confront some very hard truths about life.
I learned something from that explosion. Beauty doesn't last forever. It can be blown off your head.
You know, for kids!
And of course, the hair problems also provide a really amusing bit of contrast to the seriousness of what has occurred at Megalomart's death site.
What about Buckley? Did you find him?
I'm sorry, sir, but so far it appears that there were no other survivors.
Oh my God! I'm bald!
Hey, come on now, dry those tears. Not everybody can pull off the egghead look, but you come close. Before we move on, I really want to point out this guy in the background, the fire chief, who will show up again in about 9 episodes in the slapstick classic of firefighting, We Will Go. It's actually kind of cool to see a voiceless background character get promoted to a central figure in an episode. Same design and everything. Neat. But anyway, getting back to the subject at hand, I really enjoy how this episode gets so much use out of a nothing character like Buckley. Ordinarily, a familiar character's demise on a show would be the cause for like all these sad feelings and just, oh my god, I can't believe they're gone. Even if they were just a small-time player, it'd be like, oh no, that's somebody's favorite character, I swear, I love them and they took him away, they killed him, how could they do this? Ugh. But Buckley's intense apathy and simplistic dialogue means that he feels distinctly hollow in a way where the audience doesn't really get a chance to connect with him in any meaningful way or feel very strongly about any of his appearances. If any of the characters that we were familiar with at this point in the show were going to die, then Buckley was the logical, the perfect one to go. Even somebody like Dooley, who has a similar sort of absence to his personality, would have been the wrong choice, as he's just a kid, and it's okay for kids to be a bit on the bland or creepy or just absent side, as we still sort of believe that they have room to grow and develop as people, because just like they're kids, you know, they're gonna grow naturally. That's what kids do, hopefully. But Buckley, though, he becomes more interesting dead than alive, which is so awful to say out loud, so let's instead pivot over to Hank, who is now emerging from the hospital.
All right, let's go home.
Dad, you're all right.
Is there any permanent damage?
No damage, no scratches, no dents, no dings. Bobby, what do you say we go hit the batting cages?
Okay.
As adorable as Bobby's joy is, and as obvious as Hank's suppression of his feelings are, I have to give it to Peggy in this scene, as she manages to come off as authentically worried about her husband and gets off this great bit of description when it comes to her niece.
Now, Luanne is going to look different, maybe even hypnotically grotesque, but do not stare.
You know, fun fact, I've been called hypnotic, I've even been called grotesque, but hypnotically grotesque? Like, okay, that is the kind of masterful description that I just have to stand in awe of, as it perfectly captures that surreal feeling of looking at something in the uncanny valley, where your brain is left to puzzle out what the hell it's even looking at. Bravo, Peggy, I tip my glasses to you. You are, by far, the best.
Oh, thank you. I feel pretty.
And in the same breath of praise, I have to say that Luanne's change in attitude is also so fascinating to see, because it feels like a realistic coping mechanism for what she's just gone through. After coming face to face with your own mortality, a person can come to believe that they need to make like big changes on their whole outlook on life, since it's their old lifestyle that led them into the disaster in the first place. So what possible good is it? What use? Why would I ever keep it around? It's like, hey man, you know, there I was going through the world living how I thought it was supposed to be, and then boom, a giant shitstorm came thundering down. So what possible use, what utility does my old view of things have if it led me directly into that deadly situation and left me totally unprepared? Why would I ever trust that way again? And if that way didn't help save my life, why should I believe you when you tell me that I should go back to it, huh? And while that is how Luanne is handling things, for Hank, his life goes through a more subtle but equally disturbing shift.
I had nothing to do with that explosion, which hasn't affected me in any way.
Now don't be looking at Hank with those judgmental eyes, Boomhauer, both because your eyes are pretty fucking freaky and because you're drinking out of a goddamn koozie. And sure, yeah, whatever, Hank might have literally pulled that glass out of his ass, but sometimes it's nice to turn on the lights once in a while and see what you're slurping down, you feel me? Oh, and don't you think for a Mississippi second that I've forgotten about you, Mr. Strickland, having the audacity to come rolling around in your kitty, offering Hank his position back and insinuating that he may or may not have had something to do with that explosion.
I might be a little late. I don't know if I gave Megalomart my notice.
Oh, I think you gave your notice, Nitro.
Considering the calloused way you tossed his branch of Strickland Propane aside into the gutter with that MF Featherton, I wouldn't go back to that old job without some serious renegotiating of terms.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Don't say doing your wife. Don't say doing your wife. Don't say doing your wife. Doing your son?
Remember, kiddos, get as much information in writing as you can. Don't ever rely on your boss's kind words or empty promises, because if they are serious about their offers or terms, then they would be fine, they'd be okay, they'd love to put their signature on something to that effect. Ditto with commissions or your parents saying that they love you or commissioning your parents to say that they love you. And speaking of one-sided parental love, let's notice that Bobby is once again eating grandma's cookies, meaning that a future classroom freakout is inevitable. Although I've heard that the boy now prefers to have his breakfast with a soupçon of something exquisitely dry.
I am in the middle of decrumbing the toaster.
Save the crumbs.
What a fucking weird kid. Okay, though. Let's cut all the funny business and finally get down to what's really going on. Let's talk about what's happening with old Hank the Tank. Up until this point in the series, Hank has actually been surprisingly straightforward with his feelings. He told Peggy how upset he was when Luanne decided to move in with Boomhauer. He screamed his love for his family into the gales of the tornado, and he was willing to be honest with his fears of letting Bobby down at the shooting competition. I would argue that Hank's reputation for being emotionally closed off primarily comes from the latter half of the series. However, this episode may actually be the originator of his desire to keep things bottled up. In much the same way that people will claim that Peggy got way more pretentious and awful after surviving her parachute not opening due to some sort of catastrophic brain injury that exaggerated her self-worth and destroyed the language center part of her bubblegum mind, causing her Spanish to deteriorate into the mess that it is, I believe that Hank is suffering from PTSD from the explosion, which caused a similar change in his personality, where he doesn't feel comfortable opening up about his fears because people aren't allowing him to express his anxiety how he wants to. Because let's really think about this. Let's consider this from Hank's perspective. His life was nearly ended by Propane, the cornerstone of his livelihood and something which he believed to be a force of good in the world, and now that security has been ripped away. That sense of place is gone, and people are just expecting him to be okay with handling it again, to just go back to work like nothing happened. Even if Peggy did initially try to support him as best as she could, with Hank adamantly refusing to say that anything was wrong, so it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of no, I'm fine, I'm good, I don't have any emotions, I don't have any bad feelings about this at all, but I really do, so please help me. And then everyone goes whoa, what's with you, Mr. Emotional? Is something fucking wrong with you? Yes, something is very deadly wrong with poor Hank. Help the man.
Sounds to me that what you're really afraid of is your own death.
What? Nobody's afraid of death. That's crazy.
And it's all well and good if you want to say, man, I can't believe Hank is only now realizing that propane is dangerous. Why is this news to him? Why is he being so caught off guard by the explosion? Hasn't he been living with this kind of risk for years? But the thing is, Hank only really knew that propane was dangerous in an abstract or hypothetical or hell, even just an academic kind of way, the way that we all know that we could technically get into a car accident anytime we go driving, but to be held within its burning jaws and see the people around you disfigured or even killed by that force is something else entirely. So even if Hank thought that he was prepared for this sort of thing, you can't really prepare yourself for such an overwhelming experience. Because even though Hank does know on an intellectual level that he has been handling propane correctly and safely for years, the very real possibility of being killed has now been thrust into his face, meaning that his body is beginning to react with primal fear whenever it thinks a similar situation is about to occur. This survival instinct of our minds doing whatever it can to keep us from replicating a deadly mistake is what is at the root of Hank's PTSD and is what causes this rather well-animated hallucination. This is a really compelling problem to put onto Hank's shoulders, as it isn't an exaggerated or unfounded fear, something done just to make us laugh at how silly Hank is acting. No, this is a very legitimate terror, a feeling that doesn't seem to have any immediate solution. So let's leave Hank to swelter in his own sweat for a while, as we have to address some of the other situations going on in the background. First, let us talk about Luanne. Her coping mechanism is to reject her former lighthearted view of the Digimon's digital world and instead begin exploring the physical world through photojournalism, depicting the horrors of CNN and reminding us of the inevitable fate of all of our Arctic friends.
In the real world, beauty fades and penguins die a cold, horrible death.
Am I glad he's frozen in there and that we're out here and that he's the sheriff and that we're frozen out here?
This version of Luanne, while yes very cynical and dour, retains her inherent silliness and more simplistic view of the theory of forms, which makes her feel consistent at heart, but shows that she is trying to do something new. And I really enjoy the times where we can see characters going through this kind of filtering, where we can still feel their core personality trying to break through underneath, but we understand that they are also resisting falling into their normal mode of operation. And I think this kind of struggle between who you want to be and who you are at heart, the person that you've sort of developed over the years, is very true to life, as changing your entire personality isn't as simple as just flicking a light switch, where just overnight you happen to lose all remnants of who you used to be. Human beings don't work that way, at least except in the most absolute of most like traumatizing cases, I suppose. But in these sort of situations where it's just like, you know what, that whole thing that I used to be isn't very good, so I want to do something else, boom, like it's not going to be a perfect shift over to this new sort of thing. There's going to be sort of these like holdovers of who you used to be. And for Luanne, I think it's a huge shame that she wasn't allowed to explore this change, this like new direction in her life without getting picked on. Her whole idea for photojournalism is disregarded as just a big joke. It's something stupid she's trying to do. It's something that the show wants us to shrug off and perhaps even look down on her for. It's actually kind of fucked up if you think about it. The episode is sort of making the case that there is a right way of grieving and a wrong way. Personally, I say that people should be allowed to explore their grief however they choose, especially when it isn't self-destructive or hurting other people. There's also something about the act of photography that is weirdly profound when it comes to dealing with a loss, as it serves as a way of locking people and places into a fixed point in time where nothing bad will ever happen to them, and you know that for certain. Or if you photograph something awful, then it remains awful forever, with the pain and loss of the moment held outside of human memory, allowing for an objective and reflective perspective, a clinical distance that allows you to see, assess, and reflect on the horror with an emotional detachment. But there I go again, playing armchair psychologist, when all I'm really trained to do is point out erection and cum jokes in Shakespeare's works. You think like the little daggers that they have are just daggers? You think when Romeo says, "I want to die the little death with you," he's actually talking about dying? Oh boy, I got a term for you, and it's called petite mort. Look it up. Oh, and of course I'm also trained to give snide grades that make students hate the learning process. Ooh. Although I did have my freshman class watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine's classic episode Duet as a way of teaching them how to structure character dialogue, character monologues in fact, so if they hated learning about that, then we are sadly going to have to lay the blame on their poor tastes and not my teaching skills. Spoken like a real teacher, huh? And while we're on the subject of bad taste, Dale does the typical conspiracy theory thing by taking a tragedy where people actually died and frame it as a nonsensical cover-up.
The boy is no more. All they found left of him was his name tag.
Well, that's all he wanted them to find. Classic cover-up. That boy's no deader than Mother Teresa.
Oh yeah, that Buckley. He was so obviously a paid actor, working in league with D.B. Cooper and Daddy Mothman in a bid to overturn Sonny Bono's Copyright Term Extension Act so that certain works can enter the public domain 20 years earlier than the government intended. Sigh, do you remember when these kind of fringe theories were considered to be the primary domain of dumbasses and whack jobs instead of the main talking points of chuds that somehow captured the hearts and wallets of supposedly sensible citizens? What did Hank once say?
I've got the right of free expression.
Oh, you can have all the free speech you want. Within the law.
Yeah, so if I were Dale, I would watch what I damn say about Buckley's untimely demise, as I am pretty confident in saying that the woman we see being consoled by the priest is probably the boy's mother, and spreading lies about him not being dead, while funny in the confines and context of the show, are absolutely abhorrent to see in real life. Again though, this ugliness is presented by Dale, who manages to transform an otherwise gross act into something really funny through a process that I am pretty sure is called comedic alchemy, and can only be done by the most likable of characters. I also find it interesting that the show did not use FBI agents at the Megalomart site and instead used the Texas RRC, or the Railroad Commission of Texas, as they are the department which oversees the stewardship of oil, natural gases, and pipeline safety, of which propane does fall under their jurisdiction. So there you go, everybody. If you want to know who really runs the world, it is not the CIA or the FBI or girls, it is the Texas RRC.
This is a very straightforward investigation.
That's what they want you to think.
Sir, we are they.
And clearly, the whole thing of them supposedly only finding Buckley's name patch in the wreckage was inaccurate, or perhaps told to hide the grim reality of what was discovered, as the boys of the RRC did find something to stick in Buckley's coffin, something which convinces Dale in the most straightforward of ways that the boy is actually dead.
I'm going in.
Coffin Full of Vomit. That would make for a great death metal band name, or perhaps a crappy novel about zombies running a roller coaster park. And it is at Buckley's funeral that we begin to see the storylines collide, with Hank refusing to grill for Buckley's wake because he's still dealing with his fear of propane, and Mr. Strickland is here, present and wired up for what he assures us is an unrelated issue, although this is not the last time we'll see him wearing one of these devices in the second half of a two-parter story. But who cares about those eerie coincidences, as Luanne decides to steal the casket spotlight by giving some airtime to a very understated issue.
I guess y'all expect me to cry for Buckley. But I am not, because there are a lot more important things to cry about. This is a picture of what a hungry Irish child looks like.
Oh my god, I just love that pose he's in. I'm not certain, but I believe that this kind of thing is called subjective photography, although please feel free to correct me if I'm getting any of my terminology mixed up. All I know is that Bobby has been caught in a moment of desire, exposed and in a vulnerable state. The anticipation of his treat is clear on his face, and with his hand rendered so close, and with him pushing off from one foot, held so far away from what he seeks, but clearly on the arc of obtaining what he wants. Plus, it is very surreal to see him eating fries in his underwear, as we tend to think of being in our underwear as something that's done first thing in the morning when we're first getting up and getting our morning started, but the fries, those are more of an afternoon or evening snack and definitely not a meal by themselves, which makes it very odd to see a plate of them all by themselves. This amazing photograph has elements of a Renaissance painting and the Bigfoot footage, making it a tour de force of artistic merit. I also love how the poor priest just leaves that stupid picture up for the rest of the service, with Bobby's indifference to our suffering and sorrow mimicking how the world just keeps on spinning after one of us passes, concerned only with our next meal, our next satisfaction, with no time or even awareness of the dead that surround us.
This is depressing. You want to go play in the cemetery?
Okay.
But now here comes the special sauce of the episode, the left field contender that manages to tie together all of these uneasy threads. That person, surprisingly, is Con of all people, who apparently shared something of an off-screen relationship with Buckley.
At first, I didn't much like Buckley, I admit. But then I saw how much he pissed off my neighbor, Mr. Hank Hill, and I decided to seek out this Buckley fellow, get to know him. I grew to love that boy.
When I first watched this episode, I thought that Con was being insincere or just kidding around, as he's sort of speaking in this jokey kind of way where it doesn't sound like he's being serious at all. But I'm actually going to chalk that up to Toby Huss not quite being able to draw out the more emotional qualities of Con's voice yet, or at least that the voice director for this take did not instruct him to sound more authentic. Whatever the case may be, I do believe now, watching this episode today, that Con really did do as he says and shared a connection with Buckley, one that took place entirely out of the view of the audience. It is really tempting for me to say that it would have been great to see those two pal around, as perhaps Buckley may have even opened up to Con in a way that totally changes our perspective of his character. Maybe Con is the only person in the world who actually gives Buckley a chance to speak his mind, and now we see that Buckley's a super secret chatterbox out there. That would have been perhaps kind of interesting to see, but I do like that there are things happening outside of our awareness, secret friendships and alliances, as that makes this town feel way more interconnected and alive than we may think it is. And in a bid to comfort the mourners, Con begins to tell a story about a man being chased by a ferocious tiger.
Tiger chased him to edge of cliff. Man falls off. Halfway down, he grab onto a branch. He look up. He see one hungry tiger. Now he look down. He see another hungry tiger waiting for him on the ground below. And not a good place to be. He know, for sure, he gonna die.
I have to give all the praise in the Seven Realms to the animators because they so perfectly captured that sort of calligraphy-style scroll art that first came about during Buddhism's initial arrival in China in the 1st century, with this style seeing more popularity during the Tang Dynasty and becoming more refined and widespread during the Qing Dynasty. This is a pretty wild shift in art style, and it's all done for the sake of one quick story, but it succeeds in being extremely memorable and evoking a greater sense of authority by being so different. Like, if you watch this episode one time, you'll remember this story because it just looks like so visually like amazing. Therefore, it is easy to call back to later because we have this like strong mental picture of what Khan was talking about. So it's actually like really like perfectly well placed in the structure of the episode, which is great. Khan's Parable is a story about coming to terms with the inevitability of death, where your reward for climbing up the cliff and putting in all that extra hard work is the same thing as letting go and falling to the bottom of the ravine. A tiger waits in both places. There is no escape. There is only a brief struggle to stay alive, one that will inevitably end. But that's not the whole story, as there is a strawberry, a beautiful, peaceful, serene strawberry growing on our same branch.
Oh, he pluck it and eat it. And it was the sweetest tasting strawberry he ever had.
It's really odd, isn't it, how a silly little show like King of the Hill can present such a beard-stroking idea. If you refuse the strawberry, then you will lose your energy and fall into the tiger's jaws, having denied yourself even that small pleasure. But if you do eat the strawberry, then all that remains afterward is the bitter taste of doom. It seems that there is no satisfying solution, no clever way to, actually, I'm built different, your way out of dying, even if Mr. Gribble happens to think otherwise.
I am not going to die. Chromium picolonate. Every orifice, every day.
Obviously, there are many different ways to approach this story, ranging from the rebellious, where the man chooses to fight the tiger while he still has his strength, to the pragmatic, where the man is able to find footing on the cliff and just wait for the tigers to leave. But for me, I choose to read this story as a commentary on how our lives, our bodies, will serve a purpose, even if that purpose isn't one we would enjoy. The tigers will be fed, my bones will become part of the landscape, and the cosmic ballet will go on. What works so well about this story, for me anyway, is that the episode isn't really concerned about the question of an afterlife specifically, but rather what we leave behind. Because if it were a question of the afterlife, then the answer would probably just be to smooth over Hank's worries by telling him to go to church and reassuring him of the teachings of Methodism, which is something that he is already fully aware of and fully believes in. Like, if this were a question of him rediscovering his comfort with his faith and place in the universe, then that would be one thing, but Hank is already fully on board with that message, so it's like kind of a dead-end direction to take him. Instead, the episode questions the process of being alive in the first place and wrestles with the issue of living with the knowledge that we will die and pass into some other mode of being, whatever you personally believe that mode to be. It's less of a oh my gosh, I wonder what's going to happen to me after I die, what will that be like, where will I be kind of thing, and more of a philosophical statement, something more akin to hey, I don't want to lose what I have going on right now because it's all kind of working out for me. I don't want to lose my son or my wife or whatever, because dying is the ultimate change, and no matter what we think that change may be, it will be significant kind of deal. In essence, the explosion has opened Hank's eyes to the fragility and fleeting nature of life and has instilled in him a primal fear, one that cannot be easily cured by the reassurances of a peaceful afterlife, because you can know something and accept it intellectually, you can accept it fully, the way that you know that a bungee cord will save you from smashing into the rocks below, but there is still a psychological, a physiological reaction that overpowers your better senses, which is why the D in PTSD stands for disorder. Basically, you can't just think your way out of a condition like this. You either need to be medicated, or you need to get wider perspectives, or you just need to have some different mode of operating, because what you have right now is not going to help you out of it. You might be able to bury it a little bit, but it's going to come bubbling to the surface eventually, which is where, again, getting wider perspectives and insights into the situation can help, which is where Mr. Khan now re-enters the picture. And I think it's really telling that Khan is the one to have this moment to shine, as John Redcorn was also in attendance, and I could very easily see an alternative version of this scene where Mr. Redcorn instead shares a story from his culture to serve a similar purpose. But because it's Khan, Mr. Jokester over there, we initially doubt the authenticity and validity of what he's saying, which I don't believe is something that we would do if Mr. Redcorn came up and spoke instead.
Can you believe this guy? He tells a joke at a funeral.
Highly inappropriate.
Yeah, but It was funny.
And as Hank's fears continue to mount and he discovers that there really is no way out of this conundrum, he will return to Khan's story. For now though, his fears of Propane have reached a boiling point where he even becomes afraid for the lives of other people handling the gas.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, Hank, I will do it myself.
After accurately pinpointing her hubby's unmentionable problem, she takes him to a support group of survivors of propane explosions, which is very reminiscent of the time that she took Hank to the poop chute doctor for his constipation issue. This recovery group is one of those little mini scenes that is so stuffed to the gills with perfect lines and deliveries that I don't even know where to start. And hey, we even see a familiar face in attendance.
Ever since the explosion, every song I play sounds like Feels So Good.
Maybe that's because it does feel so good to be alive.
No, that's not it.
Is the greatest part of this scene the way that Chuck clears his spit valve via some ominous hissing? No. Is the best part when the group leader and his pencil mustache correctly says that Hank is afraid of death because it will mean that he doesn't get to sip wine with his friends or fuck his wife? No. The best part is this understated little exchange between Peggy and the group leader dude.
I was in a propane explosion, now I'm afraid of propane. Next person?
Do you think he needs shock treatment?
Perhaps.
That is just easily the best thing for me. It's the extra little bit of garnish that makes the show so snappy and delightful to rewatch. Of course, these profound insights of understanding or appreciation can indeed go the other direction, as I never really picked up on the monstrous way that Hank discusses Bobby's guardianship situation in the event of Mr. Hill's untimely demise.
Me and Peggy could sit up in bed at night picking out colleges.
Peggy would not be included in any guardianship situation.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Okay, so I don't want to come off as unhinged here, but this is easily the worst thing that Hank has ever said or implied. Like, what the fuck are you saying? Is he honestly dead ass making the point that he doesn't want Peggy to have guardianship over their son when he's dead? Like, am I mishearing this or something? Have I wandered into some alternate universe where just, words don't mean words anymore. They're just like these things that we make, these sounds that don't mean anything. Like, what's going on? Perhaps Hank is planning to give Peggy the Waylon Smithers routine and have her buried alive with him. Or is this some sort of strange machismo like, ooh, I don't want my boy to be raised by a girl kind of shit? Or maybe he's just really against the idea of Bobby being raised in a single-parent household since Hank was brought up in a two-parent household, even if it was extremely shitty and toxic and they, it seems like they broke up as soon as he turned 18. Like, either way, it's fucked up and awful however he's looking at it, but I want to know which way it is so I can be properly, correctly mad at Mr. Hill. Man. Like, even if you hate Peggy with all your heart and soul and think that she's an irredeemable monster that burned your water supply, poisoned your crops, and unleashed a Peggy plague into your houses, then we can all still agree that she at least loves her kid enough to want to raise him or be in his life in some way. Remember, Peggy worked damn hard to conceive that kid, so I don't believe for a second that she would just casually alley-oop him to one of the guys, or God forbid Cotton or Mr. Strickland of all people. Even supposing if Bobby went off to live with the best possible alternative caretakers, Gary and Tilly, to say that Peggy would not be involved in the guardianship situation is wild to me. I cannot even imagine what Peggy's life would be like without Hank or Bobby in the picture. She would either be dead within a month or running a successful bid for president. Whew, there is no middle ground with her. She would either be like queen of the planet or dead in the gutter. Like, that's it. Ugh. But hey, let's calm down, let's take a chill pill, take a salt tablet, take it easy, Parcheesi. Why don't we switch over to a much less rage-inducing point of the episode, because Luanne's beauty school friends have sent her a present, a consolation for her recent troubles. How sweet. And what is this present exactly?
Sorry for your loss. You had beautiful hair. They made me a wig. Throw it out.
Oh, it's a shitty wig. Thanks, question mark. Now, call me a cynical bastard if you will, but I really believe that they intentionally made her a shitty-ass wig as a dig. Consider this, Luanne is thought to be a fucking idiot by her peers, and even her teacher, Miss Kremser, usually puts her down or like gives her an F on her assignments, and yet Luanne still ended up making a wig that looks dead on like her mom's hairstyle. But I'm supposed to believe that the beauty queen herself, my wife, Sharona Johnson, just, could only cobble together a ratty little wig of of many colors for Luanne. Because I guess her skills just happen to fly out the fucking window for this one instance. Sure, whatever you say, babe. If you want to live in your comfy little blanket of lies, where Luanne's beauty school peers happen to break through their usual cattiness and actually decide to do something kind for Luanne in her moment of need, then I won't deny you your sliver of imagination land, but I will point out that it is a bit weird that they seem so oddly incompetent when it comes to their kind gesture. How very convenient. In any case, Luanne eventually gets called out for the same kind of cynicism that I'm showing by Khan of all people, who forces her to confront her suppressed feelings for the dead Buckley.
I heard enough from you. The more you hold in, the more you put on strange Sinead O'Connor act. I cry river of tear for Buckley. Why not you?
See, that is a much, much better performance from Mr. Huss, as I really feel the pain in Khan's voice, a pain which is also heard after Luanne discovers a little birthday card left to her by her blown-apart beau.
Hey, so for your birthday I wanted to get you those earrings you like, but I'm kind of tapped out, so here's some CDs I don't listen to anymore. Later, Buckley.
Buckley.
And to her aid comes God's own messengers, the Manger Babies, who show that they aren't just a couple of poorly produced puppets, but can also be a source of comfort and personal reflection on Luanne's part, which is very similar to how she said she used to use puppets all the time when speaking to her social worker. Even if that comfort isn't necessarily about getting over Buckley's passing, but instead something a little bit more important.
I don't want to look pretty anymore. That's just rubbish. Every girl wants to look pretty, right, How?
God, that penguin is so fucking cute. I don't know what it is. I love that puppet. Like, have you ever seen a really cute baby and you just want to eat it? But yeah, this is a pretty awful situation for everybody involved, and I'm glad that the episode decided to lean into how horrible this event has been for our cast. It treats the subject with an appropriate amount of weight, making it feel like this is a real disaster, like the building really blew up, and man, it's just kind of getting to everybody. Like, even when Bobby thinks that his dad is going to be okay and that things are pretty much back to normal, he overhears Hank talking to the guys about death and custody battles with Gary and Tilly, and starts freaking the fuck out at the thought of his father passing away, rightfully so, showing that there are still some nasty fears lurking in his many folds.
Go with that. I'm not saying Bobby goes to either of you.
What's going on? I thought he was gonna be okay.
Oh, Bobby, it's okay. Come here, let me commemorate your crisis with a little bit of lyrical comfort. Ahem. In your mind's eye lives a memory hard to find, blinded by pain, and a cold voice sings a melody. Hear it sing, hell-frozen rain. Are her safe arms feeling dangerous, missing truths frozen in lies? Is your family just a memory? Once again, hell-frozen rain falls down. But if that's not comforting enough, then perhaps Boomhauer's mumblecore version of René Descartes will soothe your troubled soul.
Don't matter, man. It's the oldies, old time. You know what I think, man? Like them dang I think, therefore you are, man.
Not to take this amusing snippet of comedy too seriously, but I have always found the sentiment behind cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, quite comforting. Because even if our lives will eventually end, either in pain or obscurity, we lived, my friends. We thought, therefore we were. The sun is destined to eventually go supernova and engulf the planet, meaning that everything we are or were will be forgotten and burned away. But that's okay! Just because something is forgotten doesn't mean that it never existed. Our joy, love, sorrow, and triumphs have their own merit. They will remain forever at one point in time. They happened. Besides, if everything will eventually be lost to the sands of time, then the act of memory is itself inherently irrelevant, dare I even say unnatural. So enjoy being unnatural, my friends, because the vast majority of the universe is dead space, meaning that something as simple as cutting a satisfying fart is a triumph over the nothingness that dominates space and time. Every second that you are alive, or doing something that you enjoy, or being with people that you love is an unspeakable success. That's what victory tastes like. That's what it means to mar, to scar, to ruin the face of despair forever, to fight the power and laugh your way into history. But oh no, there's no time to appreciate our stellar place in this wonderful world. Bouncin' Bobby Hill has gone missing. Better get Ladybird on the case.
Come on. Smell the pie, girl. Come on. All right, she's locked on Bobby's scent.
And just to show that King of the Hill hasn't lost its ability to create awesome sights, Bobby is found at the top of the world with the sun going down in an amazing blaze over Arlen, which makes a deep statement about something. This show is genius. With Hank and Bobby reunited, the pair share a sincere moment of talking through their feelings and fears, with Hank reassuring his son that his life is going to be okay, even if disturbing changes may come about.
My dying should be at the bottom of the list. You need to relax and enjoy life. Huh.
You need to relax and enjoy life.
And the final dog crosses the finish line. Through this discussion with Bobby, Hank finally understands the meaning behind Khan's story, and that magically solves his fear of propane. So don't get me wrong, this final scene with Bobby is quite stunning. The way that Hank retells Khan's story through the lens of football is just so Hank, and Bobby's crappy attempt at telling that Eskimo joke is such like a weird rambling anti-joke that it actually kind of breaks my brain that they had the gall to end the episode on that note. I just think it's a little bit of a disappointment when you consider the rest of the heavy topics that the show has been laying down. It's a really nice sentiment, and I like that Hank understands that he also just needs to relax and enjoy life. I just can't square that advice with the seriousness of what Hank's been going through. It would be like telling a war veteran not to tense up when you hear a helicopter because, hey man, you just gotta relax and enjoy life. Like, what are you freaking out about? It's okay. You know, right? It's just a little bit too romantic and smooth of an ending for me. But I can't exactly say how I would improve the ending, which means that my critique here is actually pretty weak by my own standards, but it has never sat right with me how Hank just goes from literally using a 10-foot pole on his grill to being back at Strickland Propane within the span of just a few minutes, especially when the post-credit scene shows Enrique, Joe Jack, and a surprisingly buxom Maria Montalvo digging into Hank's fears like they're his personal hell demons.
Hank, look out, it's gonna blow.
Hey, Hank, you got a light?
Help, honey. My arm's been blown off by propane.
Good lord, what a bunch of dicks. Is it any wonder that Hank starts hiding his feelings more after this whole experience? Sheesh. But yeah, to start wrapping this all up here, I think that Propane Boom Part 2 is a really well done exploration of trauma, dread, and what it means to survive a terrible disaster, one that saw the death of a beloved character. And yet, magically, it retains its lighthearted spirit, perhaps best shown off when Taps is transformed into Feels So Good. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. The show just, I don't know, it tried to put this really super clean bow on all these complicated and fearsome emotions at the end, which feels a bit sloppy, a bit unsatisfying, and a bit at odds with how heavy this subject matter is. I know some people out there don't like the idea of watching a character do the hard work of overcoming their problems, but those are the complaints of unimaginative troglodytes. I don't know, I can just picture a reality in which King of the Hill has a lot of fun with a hypothetical third part to the storyline, one where Hank has to recapture his love and comfort with God's guess. Another episode of Trial and Errors could have just been such a hoot, like having the guys help Hank get incrementally more comfortable with propane and testing his boundaries, poking him and seeing what he's okay with and what he's not and seeing him freak out. That could have been super interesting and super funny to watch. But I suppose the show must go on, even if that means Hank has to suck it up and swallow any lingering fears he may have, just so things can return to the oh-so-precious status quo. Although we do see Luanne's hair regrowing throughout the season, so things haven't exactly been reset to zero, far from it. And they very easily could have done like she's just wearing like a wig that happens to look exactly like her hair, so I'm actually really impressed that they managed to go with this, they had the intestinal fortitude, dare I say, to have her like sort of regrow her hair and trust that people realize that that's from the explosion. As we look into the watery depths of Season 3, like Narcissus looking into his pool, we will see similar examples of growth from our characters, growth that will have profound ripple effects on the seasons to come.
That way, I could be your opening act and we could travel the world together. Connie, I'm your little candy man.
So yes, there you go. That's the episode. Sorry this video went on for so long. There was just like, a lot of stuff to go over, and I probably still missed a few great moments. I know I did, so sorry for sort of leaving those out too. Anyway, there's no time for looking back. It's after 5:40. We have to see what lies beyond this awful, awful subject of dying, and what precisely is the thing that makes life worth living.
All right. See you around.
Ah, yes, shallow infatuations, but of course, that's what keeps me going, baby, like a moth to a flame. Until then, we can say that this episode, titled Death of a Propane Salesman, get it? Because that could mean both Hank and Buckley, they don't know who's gonna be, that whole thing, has indeed been reviewed to death. Thanks for watching, and try to do something nice for yourself today, okay? You never know when that hell-frozen rain will come falling down.
Red Book says losing a boyfriend is the fourth most painful loss, right between grandmother and penis.